Jim is a man who doesn't need a lot of introduction. He's actually Lord O'Neill, but I received prior permission to refer to him in first name, in case any of you are questioning. I should say he's a man that doesn't need a lot of introduction, but he is really and truly one of the leading voices on policy making, on economics, and on public policy as well. When I was a wee analyst at Goldman back in the day, I was at Goldman Sachs. He was the chief economist at the time. He doesn't remember because he was very busy. He went on to become chairman of Goldman Sachs Asset Management, later played a role in public policy, serving as commercial secretary to the UK Treasury, and then chairing international reviews, including the UK government review on antimicrobial resistance, also very topical in today's landscape, by the way, in health policy discussions. But as our MC was just saying, I guess you are most well known for coining the term BRIC. And I say BRIC because back then there was no S. There was
no South Africa.
There was no South Africa back then. And you coined the term back in 2001 as Brazil, Russia, India, China. So I guess I want to start off just asking you economically, right? Mm-hmm. Because at the time you sort of banded all of these countries together because you identified them as the fastest growing economies, the economies that we need to be aware of.
Yeah.
You look at today, I had a quick glance back at growth, and you've got, Brazil and Russia have barely doubled in terms of GDP growth for various reasons. China's 6 times the size. India is 4 times the size from when you coined it. Have things panned out as you thought they would?
So occasionally I have joked that perhaps I should have called it ICS. Because Brazil and Russia had a fantastic first decade and a pretty erratic, dreadful one since. And I defend myself by saying in the first reports there is a small reference to that ultimately for both those countries they've got to get over the commodities curse, and they haven't. They're very, very dependent, as we see, with the commodity price cycle.
Yeah.
But of course, for the group as a whole, and especially linked to the political issue that was also mentioned by the MC, China and India are so big that just carries so much weight. So, I mean, if you look at the size of them today, despite actually obviously China having itself quite a lot of challenges, they are way bigger than any of the scenarios that we suggested back in the day, so to speak.
Impressive then on economic growth. Our MC earlier was listing all of the countries that are now included in the BRICs, including South Africa. I'll just run through them as well. You've got Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, the UAE over here, and Indonesia. Did you ever anticipate when you put this acronym together that it would actually evolve into something more than just an economic grouping, into perhaps a political grouping of sorts?
No. In fact, I still occasionally tease policymakers and their advisors from those countries that they never asked my permission.
Would you grant it?
Yeah, because it's helped my popularity. What I would say more seriously, and I have written on this and still do, I wish they would have identified more transparently and more clearly what are the things that they really want to achieve. I generally think symbolically the existence of the BRICS group and its expansion is very powerful, primarily because it symbolizes the woeful states of all the major global governance institutions, literally all of them, in that they are underrepresented. There was a period from the financial crisis in 2008 to around about 2012 where that was starting to change. in the glory days of G20 cooperation, but it's regressed backwards a bit. And linked to some of the geopolitical tensions, but also in itself, and part of why so many countries from what these days is referred to as the global south, I think want to be part of it, is because they think it's an organization that is representing the interests of those that are underrepresented.
Yeah.
And of course, rather importantly, it doesn't include the United States.
Yeah. So let me pick up on a couple of those things. The first is that the group sort of presents itself as a group that's advocating for reform of some of those global institutions that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Have they been successful, do you think?
No. That goes back to why I had and still sort of plead for the BRICs leaders. They don't have, there's no formal advisory entity, but obviously they all have many advisors. I plead on them to focus on things that they could seriously, productively achieve by closer cooperation, which in itself would be extremely beneficial for them. But equally importantly, it would then be more persuasive about the case for them to have a bigger weight in the institutions that matter for truly global challenges. Because by just meeting every year and coming out with grandiose things about, oh, we're going to replace the dollar and
I'll get there.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, what are you actually doing other than making any of those statements?
Do you agree with the premise? And actually, one of the gentlemen of the prior conversations ended their own panel by saying that there is a shift of power taking place right now from the West.
There's certainly a shift of economic power, and absolutely no two ways about it. We are pretty close to India establishing itself as the third largest economy in the world. Obviously, if you looked at it in purchasing power parity terms, China would already be bigger than the US. And despite enormous cyclical and some, not as many as I think people elsewhere, in my view, often think, but despite some big structural challenges, China is still possibly going to be as big as the US within the next decade, possibly. And so, China and India have seen their share of global GDP rise dramatically.
Okay, so here's one for you.
Just had Chinese GDP out yesterday. I mean, and this year I think I saw
Still sub 5%.
quite a few, sub 5%, but I think quite a few sell-side analysts revised higher their forecast for Chinese growth this year.
Yeah. Okay, so the question I wanted to ask you is China the de facto leader of the BRICs today?
Because of its size, effectively, but in terms of focus, not sure. I think it's known, but it'll be more known now when I say it, I think. The whole idea of the political club came from the Russians and the Brazilians. The foreign ministers of those two countries initiated the idea. And the Russians are the ones, I think, who have been particularly proactive in causing the expansion in the last couple of years. I think the Indians and the Brazilians are both a little bit circumspect, if not reluctant. The Chinese love the symbolism of being the leader of the global south, but I don't personally observe and therefore think that the BRICS thing is that bigger important priority for the Chinese leadership.
Yeah.
It's important, but it's not up there.
But not necessarily, okay, this is in the context of BRICS, but just in sort of, the symbolic leader of the global south. And again, the reason why I'm framing it that
Yeah,
way
China loves that.
but India is also up and coming as well. And how
Yeah.
is that likely to go down with India?
So amongst the endless fascinations of the world, but also this, is the whole China and India relationship.
Yeah.
Again,
We
as
haven't even got to the US yet, by the way. I'll get there. But let's start with China.
as I've also talked about and written about frequently, I would take the BRICS group much more seriously, and suggest everybody else should, if India and China really decided to cooperate on some really basic things, such as more genuine open trade with each other. I've also recently just sort of semi-jokingly written something about whether Donald Trump is some kind of secret agent of the BRICS, because he talks about it more than any US leader I've ever come across.
Yeah, well, speaking of that, I've actually pulled up a couple of his Truth Social posts, just to give you a few. The idea that the BRICS countries are trying to move away from the dollar while we stand and watch is over. We're going to require commitment from these seemingly hostile countries that they will neither create a new BRICS currency nor back any other currency to replace the mighty US dollar, or they will face 100% tariffs. They can go and find another sucker nation. This is a quote, by the way, not me. There's no chance that BRICS will replace the US dollar in international trade or anywhere else. So he's positioning the BRICS as an anti-American group. Is that essentially, you think, the rationale behind, going back to Russia, the political incentive to get this group of countries together?
I shouldn't laugh, but he's certainly entertaining. I seem to recall another truth. Oh no, it was actually in a media interview. He gave the impression that he thought Spain was a member of the BRICS.
Yeah. One of the many wars that he
Which,
solved.
given how Spain is growing relative to the rest of Europe, maybe Spain should be one of the BRICS and not part of the... No.
Go there.
I have no idea why he says these things.
Well,
But what is really important, coinciding with his rather shocking to Indian diplomats aggressive stance on tariffs to India, he has succeeded in getting Modi to visit Beijing for the first time in 7 years.
Yeah.
And so if he really were sincerely trying to believe that he's trying to stop the BRICS alliance, he's going around it in 180 degrees the wrong way.
On the currency thing, though, is that there's been a bit of chatter about potentially creating a BRICS currency.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's your reaction to that.
Sorry, I've given it away already.
Do you want to explain that, or should I move on to the next one?
I mean,
It's difficult to form a new currency.
just a little. I mean, I had a life before BRICS where supposedly I had some vague idea about the foreign exchange market. It was never true, by the way. But I developed the early part of my life in the days of the Italian lira, Belgian franc, and so on, in the build-up to the euro. And obviously, everybody that joined the euro had to abandon the independence of their central banks. So I can't really imagine the Indians, for example, deciding that they're going to get rid of the Reserve Bank of India to have some shared BRICS currency. It's kind of preposterous.
Yeah, but one way
idea.
that they could actually have an impact is by encouraging countries to conduct trade in their own currency.
Yes.
And actually, one thing that caught my attention, and we broke this story on Bloomberg this week, is that Ethiopia have redenominated a lot of their loans into yuan. Ethiopia also one of the newest members of BRICS. That is a way that they can actually start perhaps this slow shift away from dollar denomination on these types of transactions.
I think that the more time goes by, the more I suspect that the Chinese in particular are very interested in exploring the idea of the RMB being more and more of a genuine currency for trade invoicing, Ethiopia example is one of many, but at the same time, not wanting it to be a currency that's so available for investment. And what is intriguing, in fact, I just participated in a conference in London a couple of weeks ago with quite a lot of academics about the reserve challenges to the dollar. And there was a very interesting panel about this issue. And I think most conventional finance thinkers and economists are the few that think about these kind of things, effectively believe you can't become a major currency unless you allow your currency to be freely traded. But I'm not sure that the Chinese agree with that at all, and indeed are showing signs of accelerating their desire to have the RMB used a lot more for trade with partners that they want to see trade expanding.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really interesting area to pay more attention to.
Okay, since we're talking about currencies, what do you make of the drop in the USD this year? It's down 10%. And is that partially because President Trump has been weaponizing tariffs and trade as a means of getting perhaps political outcomes that he's looking for, as in the case of India that you just referenced?
So subject to the proviso that I learnt as my professional years went on, I was going to say experience, that was a mistake. I had the self-confidence to say, currencies go up or down unless they go down or up. So that's my kind of general answer. But I have to say that I think the consensus view at the start of the year, or when the election victory of Trump first took place, kind of got the sequencing of policy wrong. I remember being at a couple of events within weeks of the election results, and the consensus view was that we were going to get a repeat of Reaganomics as such: big regulation, big tax cuts, expanding fiscal deficit, and oh yeah, tariffs would be good for the dollar. All of which sounded like complete nonsense to me. And it, surprise, surprise, it turned out to be complete nonsense, because I think what the consensus got wrong and why the dollar fell so sharply is they thought about tariffs in isolation and didn't link it to the cyclical state of the US economy, and for what I think have been quite clear and possibly growing signs of challenges to the less affluent US consumer. And it's all sort of distorted by the amazing boom going on in tech investment, but adjusted for that, the US economy has weakened a lot. Yeah. And the tariffs...
People have been calling that the K-shaped economy, the topper echelons of higher income are doing well, lower income not performing.
So I think in that regard, the dollar's decline could be ascribed 80% to being cyclical.
Okay.
And this idea that is so easy and exciting narrative that it's the beginning of the end of the reign of the dollar. I mean, I've gone through that about 10 times, and it's never happened.
Okay.
But now I'm going to contradict myself. We're only going to know when that happens after it's become clear.
But still,
and it could be the beginning, because in addition to the cyclical things, and I think there was a little bit of a touching of these areas on the last panel. I heard a bit of it when we were coming in. You have a US leader that seems to be trying to challenge many of the key things that has made America closer to this sort of exceptional place that people talk about. And if this keeps happening, then investors all over the world will be a lot more careful about having as much money allocated to the US.
When you say this keeps happening, what are you referring to? The policy making, the decision making?
Ranging from sticking the nose into the suitability of individual people at the Fed, never mind so publicly challenging the views of the Federal Reserve Chair, all the way across to the challenging of the legal authorities. And then to some degree, I think also aspects of the challenges being made to another separate thing about genuine US leadership, which is the amazing quality of US universities.
Yeah.
And all of these things, if it keeps happening, are going to pile up.
Yeah. Okay. So 80% cyclical, 20% some of the structural issues that you mentioned.
But what the point I'd like to really emphasize in this, because I do get dragged into some discussions about it, and on this bit I differ. Most of the people that think about this stuff, who I have a lot of respect for, always say it's never going to happen in our lifetime because there's no genuine alternative. But where I differ is the alternatives might actually happen because of the amount of money that forces something to change. So a small, intriguing area in that regard is right now in Europe, even though it's probably not going to happen powerfully anytime soon, there seems to be more genuine focus on structural reform inside the euro area than I was aware of for a long time, and Germany has definitely shifted some of its policy priorities.
Okay.
And you could ascribe that to the pressure from the US.
So back in my days when I was at
Goldman,
back in the day, you know, we talk about flight to quality and safe havens,
yeah.
and you would typically go into the USD on risk-off days, into US Treasuries, and that has sort of changed. That dynamic has changed, or at least been tested. Several incidents this year.
Mm-hmm.
Is gold the safest safe haven now?
Not today. I think.
Well, actually, it stabilized today, not yesterday.
Okay. You know, I had a.
I mean, you know, we're north of $4,000 here.
I did an interview with somebody locally earlier, and this was an area that we talked about a lot. You know, if I look at every financial asset together, as I often used to do to see whether the markets were collectively trying to tell us something that many of us that talk and analyze them don't yet understand, I find it impossible to come up with any credible explanation other than it looks like it's a sign of excess money, because it's pretty hard to explain why gold has been doing so well at the same time as why quite highly valued growth stocks do so well, and amusingly, and a real question to all of you gold bugs out there, why fixed income markets have been doing as well as they have as well. You know, how does the narrative of gold being a really rising safe haven fit with US 10-year bond yields going below 4%? Doesn't really make any sense. If gold hadn't done what it had done, I think there is a very optimistic scenario that I entertain in my head, that maybe we are starting to see the signs of finally a productivity improvement in the West, which AI is helping.
Yeah.
Because what is also interesting, not that I'm in this 24/7 anymore, but it's kind of in my veins, the sort of payroll hiring going on in a number of Western countries is slowing. So it might well be that that is starting to happen, and the markets would be right to think that that could be really positive for non-inflationary growth.
Yeah.
But if that's right, then gold would be half the price it is.
Okay, so that's sort of, I guess, the traditional correlations. But at the same time, and we speak to analysts on the show about this, and they say that there actually has been plenty of central bank buying now.
Yeah.
And there's a real shift out of the central bank community, and that sort of goes back to what we're saying about China. And maybe, you know, China now are in the position where, okay, do we buy US Treasuries or do we buy gold? They would rather buy gold.
I mean, I think on what you might call a flow of funds, I'm too much of an economist to, and having been burnt in my own past career, if you focus on the flow of funds too much, it explains what has happened, but if you then lean on that to try and predict the future, from my experience, it gets you in trouble. But clearly, a lot of central banks have been buying more gold.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can put it into this economic narrative of being worried about all reserve currencies and inflation and debt. Because if that were the case, then why are all these other prices doing what they're doing? But yes, it's clear that China and of course, without overly contradicting myself, you could say that as part of the beginnings of trying to do more trade in RMB, they want to have less reserves in the dollar, and therefore some of the BRICS countries are strategically allocating more money to gold. And I think there is some evidence that that might be happening a bit.
Yeah. One of the arguments that I heard, or I guess one of the narratives that became a lot more prevalent, there was an episode in the summer where the dollar was selling off, but at the same time that was accompanied by rising yields in the US. And there was a lot of talk then about the size of the US fiscal deficit.
Sure.
And then we had concerns about long-end JGBs, and then France, obviously.
Not
overseas.
even talked about Japan.
We haven't even got there. UK. And now, you know, you fast forward to where we are today, and actually 10-year US Treasuries are below 4% again.
Yeah.
Let me start with the US, and then maybe we can shift to other advanced economies. How concerned are you, really, about the level of debt that's being accumulated right now by the United States? I mean, not near crisis level, but at some point in the future, may we be at crisis level?
You know, I mean, the US clearly had 2 days of let's call it a Liz Truss moment in April. It was pretty clear. You know, in my near 40 years of looking at these things, those moments have been very, very rare for the US.
Yeah.
But
and then they announced the 90-day pause and everything recovered.
Two other immediate responses. So, at some point, I'm wanting to directly link it to Japan. At some point, there will be too much debt. But, you know, again, having gone through the length of time I have in finance, we have passed through many, many barriers of where one would have thought it's too much debt. I never forget the one and only Stan Druckenmiller, possibly the greatest macroeconomic investor of my generation, once jokingly saying to me that he'd lost more money trying to short JGBs than he'd made in everything else put together, which obviously is daft.
The Widowmaker trade finally worked, though, this year.
Well, I would imagine there's some pretty excitable bears of JGBs out there right now, and one can sort of understand it.
Yeah. The thing is, though, it's not going to be easy for any of these governments to bring down the deficits. And you see the struggles that the French various governments and prime ministers are having, trying to pass.
We need growth. They need growth. Kind of goes back to, and I partly hope that the optimistic scenario involving AI and productivity is right.
Yeah.
Because economically, and more importantly, societally, with all these weird populist political parties appearing all over the West, we desperately need something to dramatically improve productivity. And linked to it that allows our health services to work so much more efficiently and to cost our government so much less, because otherwise we will end up in an almighty crisis.
Yeah. How do you think about if you project, more long-term aging demographics, the fact that, social security benefits are going to go up and up and up, and governments will have to keep funding? How do you solve that vicious cycle beyond raising the retirement age, which, as the French have discovered, is not going to go down well with the public?
You can't solve it without a lot more economic growth, or in particular, a lot more productivity growth, and with a change of the mental attitudes of, I'll almost say, my generation, which COVID and the policy response to COVID has made so much worse. You know, it's particularly powerful. I don't know how many people here are familiar with the UK, at the risk of slightly boring those of you that aren't or not interested. It's particularly powerful in the UK at the moment. No policy initiative can come from any government that will affect a noisy minority. The case we have something called the triple lock, which gives crazy financial protection to pensioners, and it is spectacularly unfair, generationally, and if it carries on, it's going to cost working taxpayers an absolute fortune, and it's obvious that it needs to be got rid of. And as I wouldn't dismiss, for those of you that are interested in it, some tampering of it in this year's budget, because it's interesting. One of the only interesting things at the latest political conference season is there was some noises made in some of the conference fringe events, including at the Conservative one, about it.
Okay, well, you heard it here first, everybody.
I'm not saying it. I am not saying it will, but I wouldn't dismiss it.
Okay.
We need that all over the West.
Yeah. You wanted to. I'm going to give you the opportunity to talk about Japan, because I gave you that option earlier. What is concerning you?
So, what is baffling me as to why the yen in this context of the dollar being weak, you know, for my days, it doesn't look that weak. I think the yen's like close to 152 this morning. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because, if I try to rationalize it, the markets are thinking that you're going to have a very prolific deficit expanding government that is also going to force the Bank of Japan to not raise rates, which, if is accurate, is a really bad recipe for any currency. But I quickly add, as I'm sure anybody in Japanese policy advising circles knows, that is not going to go down well in Washington whatsoever, because if Scott Bessent and co have a view on any one of the major currencies, I would think the yen would be the one that they'd have the biggest view on, and I think they'd think it should be somewhat closer to 100 than 150. Yeah. So at some point, I'm not quite sure where yen vols are trading, but if they're not too crazy, I think I could imagine some dramatic movements happening with the yen in the next 6 months.
I like that you're putting your trading hat back on again. I'm going to take you back to the beginning, which is where we started. Mm-hmm. And also the fact that you mentioned to me, just outside when we were chit-chatting, you've been to this hotel before.
Yes.
So tell us the story.
So in my Goldman days, and actually before, in my Swiss Bank Corporation days, I used to come at the Gulf a lot. And I remember in the early days, one would come over from Abu Dhabi just for the day, and it was all sand, and Jebel Ali was basically nothing. But as the years went by, and linked to the BRICs, as I'm sure some of you know, I would often get asked, why those four, why not Mexico, Indonesia? And so we did this thing that we called the Next 11, which was basically to describe the 11 next largest populated emerging economies. And after repeated visits here and sitting in the lobby of this wonderful hotel, I think I actually wrote about it once, describing it as the next 11 business capital of the world. Because you can sit in the lobby here, or you could then, I'm talking like over a decade ago, and just observe people coming from who were probably Iranian, Pakistani, Nigerian.
A real melting pot of...
Real amazing melting pot.
Yeah.
And obviously, amongst many other things, these days I think Dubai is thriving from the buoyancy of some of those places.
Yeah. Lord O'Neill, thank you so much. This is a wonderful conversation, and thank you to the audience. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.